We're about 5 minutes short of 7 a.m. on the United States East Coast. Today's date is Monday, March 7th, 2022. As I continue the eternal struggle to find a comfortable position to podcast in, I want to thank you for tuning into the program. You can hear there my sometimes compatriot for the show and always companion, Dana, sharing some things with us in terms of laughter. But it is true, there's no comfy position to read or comfy position to sit. It's like, hey, enjoy your coffee, listen to me. I could have been the morning drive time person, except I share too much news for it to be useful. So today, I've entitled the show Radioactive Rumors. And it's not just because I'm putting things that are so hot that I might get a strike. It's more about the fact that literally the rumors today, a lot of the rumors cycling about what's happening in Ukraine and Russia have to do with radioactivity, with supposed dirty bombs. Who's screwing who? There's one group of people where the Russians say that Ukraine was trying to build dirty nukes, and you hear about biolabs. And then you hear on the U.S. side that Russia wants to nuke everything. And then you hear another thing that Zelensky's a third-party actor, maybe serving for someone else who wants to see the U.S. and Russia fight one another. What's the truth of it? I have no damn idea. But what I do hear is a confluence of events where there are different entities working for different intelligence services that are trying to script responsibility in advance of someone doing a nuclear attack. And considering that we now see Russia putting out basically an enemies list, which, by the way, includes most of the West. If your country has sanctions on Russia, you're on that list. U.S., Canada, the whole Anglosphere, and the EU, and a couple other odd countries like Japan, South Korea. In fact, they didn't miss anyone. I thought I saw San Marino on the list. I mean, the people don't even know where that is, but they went ahead and included them anyway, just to make sure they weren't forgotten about. Maybe they'll shoot a cruise missile into the Palazzo there in Italy. Anyway, but this is what we're looking at today, so we're going to go into a little bit of it, and I'm going to go into the rumors of some sort of deeper open source intelligence, and we'll see. I mean, I don't know what the answer is, other than I can tell you that this thing is spiraling out of control. Now, before we get into that, what I want to do, first we'll let's share the information about the program. Then we're going to talk about the energy spike for a little bit, and then we'll go into some rumors and some speculation and see where we end up. So, not sure what we expect, but this thing is not holding together well. And the elites in the West, I mean, look, they blew up the world with their bioweapon. They blew up the world now with their currency, and now we're going to see the consequences of that. Just like I said, quick hits. Russia is disconnecting its internet from the rest of the world on the 11th. Now Amex has joined Visa and MasterCard in the cancellation culture thing. And Russia has said it will consider economic sanctions as potentially a form of warfare. We've seen the Poles pull back from the idea that we're going to send Ukraine all of their Air Force, all of their MiGs, and then exchange that for F-16s. But at the same time, we've seen, the number I saw reported was 17,000 anti-tank and anti-aircraft missiles. And Russia, by the way, had a bad day yesterday in terms of their losses. I think they lost 9 planes, 30 tanks, whatever. Some real losses there. And, the Russian people, it will not be lost on them that they're facing American and European weapons. So don't be surprised when this expands. I mean, you can't say we don't want to have a war, we just want to go against you, and then say other people are going to be your mercenaries. By the way, fun to watch everyone going. Serbs and Syrians are going to fight for Russian. Turks and ISIS are going to go fight for Ukraine in the standing for democracy and diversity. So who knows? I mean, it really becomes the war of all against all. You start to see it. There's basically two political parties in the world. They're the people who say trust the system and the people who believe the fake opposition. And that's kind of the choices you have.
How did ISIS throw in with global homo, though? I don't understand.
Because the same people were paying the bills. The CIA was paying the same bills, and the Turks were moving the people between them all.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's messed up, but you want to have both sides of the equation. That way you can't have any outcomes you don't anticipate. You can't have odd actors like our Russian friends. But anyway, all right, so let's go into this. So, all right, so before we start, I want to thank everyone who supports the program. P.O. Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine, 04739. Your support keeps this going. If you want actual news here on YouTube, you better help support us because there's not a lot out there. I know, I watch, and I'm kind of disappointed. The think tank people talk abstractly. The news people follow the narrative, and very few people have seemed to figure out how to find open source intel, even though it's not that difficult, although it may become such with the Russian cutoff from the internet, but I have a hunch that this will go through anyway. What else? The Venmo CVC PRV, and we would ask anyone else, super chats are open. So, okay. So let's talk about oil before we get into this. Those of you who've been watching, you've seen the gas prices accelerate very quickly. Last night, overnight futures, the oil price for WTI, which is West Texas, and Sweet Brent, which is basically English North Sea oil, were touching up over 130 per barrel. And we saw the price of, what is it, heating oil go up to over 3,000 per square meter, which are very close to highs. I mean, I think the all-time high for oil, gas on that for barrel is 137 as of 2008. Now, some of that has been bought back today. I was just looking at the pricing today, literally right before I came on, because I wanted to share that with you. And I don't know if the markets are open yet here in the West. They probably aren't. But right now, well, the Brent one would be up. The Brent crude, as of 11 minutes ago, was at 124.8. So a little bit of that came back down, but that's still on an overall upward trajectory. West Texas crude is at 122.6. And we see basically the whole market is up anywhere from 3 to 5%. Actually, some of those are up to 7 or 8%. And what we are seeing as we watch this go through is that that's continuing, reflecting the fact that the EU and allies are considering a ban on Russian oil. And, America, in their effort to fight against tyranny and hordes, have decided that they're not going to produce oil domestically or in Canada, but they will make deals with Iran and Venezuela. So what gives? Is this everyone gang up on Russia Day because everyone in the New World Order aren't following them? Or do we see a breakout of a multipolar world where China and Russia are working together with Iran and other powers to break the world in two? I think it's a fair question to ask because, we're busy talking to countries. I mean, I've gone past the point where I can't even explain the hypocrisy of who we work with and who we don't work with. I mean, and I do understand the whole ideology thing is propaganda. I get that on some level. But Lord knows, I just like the fact that people just go along with it. But I have to remind myself, people are stupid and they don't pay attention to facts because they're lazy. They're lazy and they're stupid. And there's no other way to put it. I don't mean to be mean because, I know God had a plan for each of us, but most of us are so far off the reservation. It's crazy. All right. So that's one problem. The problem of the ruble breaking is another problem because what it functionally means is that alternative currency structures are being set up and we are seeing the shakeout of all these different pieces. So we'll have to watch how that goes, but predictions. What will really hurt is not just the price at the pump, but remember, especially in the United States, less so in Europe perhaps, where they use trains to transport more of their stuff, pretty much 90% of the goods in America at some point have to get on an 18-wheeler. That being the case, the diesel price, which I've seen, at least in my local area, it's up to about $5 a gallon, is going to make everything cost more. And the same supply shortages, shrinkflation, shutdown of world markets that's continuing, prices are going to continue to accelerate. And what's the government going to do? Right now, they have their elites going out there saying, it's not that bad. It's a price we have to suffer. Well, it's a self-inflicted wound. It's like saying, hey, the government's going to shoot you in the foot. It's your patriotic duty to be a limp. I don't know what we're supposed to say to that. It's pretty bad, but whatever. So what we do see, however, is they've gotten into the edge of a war, and the Russians are advancing and continuing their efforts to move throughout Ukraine. They've moved more aggressively into this, and their intention seems to be to take control over the whole of the country to realize their denazification goals. I don't know what it is they want in the end. I know that there's scheduled talks for later today that are supposed to come up. We'll see if anything comes of it, but I don't think it will because at this point, Zelensky's been running around like a madman trying to basically get NATO to enter into World War III for Ukraine. And it makes you wonder, what is his real goal? Who is he an actor for? Remember, this is someone who has links back to the World Economic Foundation. This is someone, who seems to be playing some sort of game that maybe he represents a third party in this. Maybe Mossad has an interest in him. I don't know. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But I want to talk about the radioactive thing because we said radioactive rumors. And like I said, at this point, everyone's watching, trying to figure this out and trying not to go insane. And the way to not go insane is twofold. Number one, find peace in the comfort of the arms of the Lord. And number two, get the hell away from cities and civilization. It's going to implode on itself. You don't want to be on the bridge when the earthquake comes. You know what I'm saying? So the radioactive rumors. Of course, nuclear war sits at the back of all of these things, and the suggestion that's been coming out more and more is a question about a dirty bomb, a radiological weapon that is not necessarily an explosive that goes off like a full nuclear blast, but that spreads radiation like cobalt and whatnot around that basically salts the earth, except salts it with radioactive salt. So the Ukrainians supposedly were working on these, if you were to believe the Russians. The Ukrainians conversely say, well, the Russians are threatening to do something like that to could nuke us. And you hear a lot of people basically priming the space for the idea that a dirty bomb will be launched. Like I reported earlier last week, Stephen Bannon says there's one of them floating around somewhere outside New York. I read another rumor said there's another one outside Kiev. And who knows? And look, these are rumors, but the idea that there's going to be some sort of a nuclear blast to break the way people think of the world is not a crazy one, because we've been programmed for since Hiroshima, really, to expect there is no greater power that can be used on Earth than nuclear weapons, which isn't really true. There are tungsten rods, there are thermobaric weapons that could be almost as big if you use them certain ways. But in any case, scary, awful, don't want. So what ends up happening is everyone is scared to death and is going to blame the other. And what we see is the perfect example of a world that's breaking, that is looking for new leadership because everyone seems absent. And what's the best way to put it? With a sacrifice. You know, it was actually funny before this came out here. I was looking up the details of Mardi Gras, or Fat Tuesday as it was called. And the history of it supposedly is before Lent, which is the time before Easter, when people are supposed to be giving things up and they give up meat, is they would eat all their meat because they didn't want to go bad. And so it became this terrible festival, you know. Carnival, Mardi Gras, you know, the weird Venetian mask you always see like in Kubrick films, all of that happening. And some people say it goes back to Lupercalia, which is a Roman festival of debauchery that's just awful. But because I was looking if there was like a sacrifice ritual involved with this, because they always like to pick days like that to do it. But I mean, I don't know. You could make the argument, but it's not super strong. So what we see is that at this time that there is a push toward an expansion of the war, that we see Russia moving more quickly to try to finish their actions in Ukraine. A lot of action reported around Kharkiv this morning, seeing that. And of course, around Mariupol, there was supposed to be a corridor for a bunch of civilians to leave. Rumors coming out is that the police wouldn't let the people leave Kiev unless they could pay $2,000. The people who could leave, who it means, did. And so the other people who are stuck there, they're stuck. And, you know, what could happen to them, who knows? But the question that a lot of people are asking, and where I'm going to start this sort of discussion, is we're going to look at this from the Russian side for a minute, because the Western side basically is easier to tell, and it goes a bit like this: that Putin is trying to blow up a nuclear power plant, you know, by the actions of the Russian military. Now they're skipping over the fact that Ukrainians are hiding militants in there, and that they're shooting pot shots at it from them, thinking that, oh, they won't shoot back. And you can't tell a Russian they can't do something. These are people who jump off 10-story buildings into snowbanks. They're going to do it even if it's a bad idea. You have to know the Slavic mentality. I don't think the West understands that properly. Eurasian civilization is different. In fact, you really have to understand this too, that the Russians see themselves as inheritors of the Greek, Eastern Roman, Byzantine, Third Rome tradition. They see themselves as an equal and separate empire. They came out, if the West sees ourselves as inheritors of Rome, you know, once Greece kind of gives way, there's two different ways. The Greeks who said, hey, the real thing is where we stayed, Byzantium, and the Romans just gave us some ideas, or the West who says, no, Rome was the real power, and then you went into Catholic Christendom and the linguistic, you know, Renaissance, all that stuff. So there's two different civilizations here, and it's actually interesting. You can even read. I was like listening to a podcast talking about the Huns' invasion of Byzantium, and it's like I saw so many things that were similar in a lot of ways to what we still experience today. But okay, so you don't need all the historical context this morning. But what I wanted to share with you was that why Putin might have gone in at the time he did, because one of the things that happened, and I remember this before they went in on, what was it, the 24th, whatever day it was that you started seeing the Ukrainians talk about they're going to get nuclear weapons, and you hear all these stories about nuclear stuff coming on, and Russia didn't want a nuclear conflict. One of the things they didn't want was a situation akin to India and Pakistan, where they're basically checks on one another because they're both nuclear powers, and Russia couldn't afford that. It would be the end of Russia's ability to do things in a sort of meaningful way, so they acted. And that's what this is from news.ofehr.ru. And we'll see, that's a site that's on Telegram that carries a lot of news. There's a couple big ones. And if you don't know, you can join the Pinelander group. That's the easiest way to get access to this, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. But there's a couple good big ones. News off here is good. Was it Bellum Acta has a lot of ones that are really interesting in terms of that. In Belaslava, if I remember right, there's a couple different ones, and there are links you'll see to, or Intel Slava rather, you'll see links to there in there, and then there's some other ones I watched from the other side too, like the Visegrad group, you know, which is a pro-wet, well, That's complicated, right? In as much as Hungary and Poland are pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia, but it's a little complicated. It's hard. I don't really get into the chats that are like, oh, hey, for the West. If I wanted to do that, I'd be on Twitter. And by the way, I'm back on Twitter, not because I like Twitter. I hate Twitter. But certain people like to communicate that way, and I needed real-time intel. So, at Real Pinelander, that's me for the time being. I'll change my name when I get bored with it. If you were following me at last War's show, you're still subscribed. Okay, so let's read this piece here, and this talks about why Russia might be. And look, this is from Telegram on the internet, but yet this is where we're going to, and this is the interface where the English speaking world and the Russian speaking world are coming together. But this is the story. To believe it or don't believe it, I'm not saying how much credit to put in it, but it gives you something to think about, and it does reflect that on the Russian side, they believe they're being unjustly targeted. They believe actually correctly that they stood up for the people of the Donbass, who were being bombed for years. They were being shelled. There's this French reporter that has this huge documentary on it that she put together, and it's just being completely gaslit and forgotten by the West. Which isn't to say that necessarily exonerates Russia from everything they're doing. I'm not saying that, but you got to know your history. But anyway, so the piece. At first, I could not understand why Putin decided, and in fact, if you want to follow along, in fact, before I do this, I'll give you a little inducement. I'm going to put this piece while we're talking about this here into the Telegram group. So if you want, this is an opportunity to join that t.me/Atlantic Homeland. And just, you can just lurk if you want. Just don't be obnoxious. The mods are usually pretty good. And if they give you a hard time, come find me. I'm at Tom Kaczynski. I'm not hard to find. All right. At first, I could not understand why Putin decided on a brutal military operation despite all his actions of previous years. Well, that is, he preferred to back out in conflict situations, avoid a direct collision, and preserve commercial profits for Russian corporations to the maximum. But now he did not behave at all like the head of a Russian Federation corporation, which I personally expected from him, thinking until the last minute that this was a bluff. Ukrainians explain it as usual. The bloodthirsty Putin has finally lost touch with reality. This version is convenient but questionable. I have heard his speeches many times in recent days. He is doing well mentally, but he regularly reports two important things. We were forced and we could not do otherwise. What happened that he turned from a corporation director into a Soviet security officer again. Everyone is talking about some secret report that changed his attitude to what is happening in Ukraine. Just a funny thing. You know how I tell you guys sometimes I have a hard time speaking, like my tongue gets numb and rubbery? I haven't had that problem for days. When I started reading this story, I literally feel like I'm lifting a whale in my mouth. So maybe there's something to this. Maybe it's just a weird coincidence. Who knows? Is the algorithm that good at tracking? Just wanted to share it as a strange observation because it hasn't happened to me for days. They might be. I have always ignored this, as well as cunning plans, strategic calculations, and so on. I know the level of strategic planning of the Russian security forces, but now it is clear that the report touched the trigger that turned on a completely different regime in Putin. There was data about nuclear weapons. You must understand, Putin is a Soviet officer. No matter how busy he is with economic issues, his initial firmware is a fight against a likely enemy with nuclear weapons. The main confrontation of the special services, of which he was an employee, took place around nuclear weapons, and now this is his main trump card. I don't know what data was in this, or specific data was in this mysterious report, but now I understand that all the indirect signs were talking about this. Hasty preparation of the campaign without regard to sociology and diplomatic courtesies. For the first time, such strict requirements for the states in Britain. The West is delaying negotiations, threatening sanctions. Moscow is not being conducted, continues to accumulate troops. The official reason was the protection of the Donbass, but we understand the Donbass has been under attack for a long time, and there were no such cruel decisions. I personally had heard moments that confirmed this vision. And keep in mind, this is translation from the Russian, so we're going into basically the Russian telegram sphere to say what they're talking about, so you can hear the other side in a way that most people just wouldn't even bother to look for. But I did not attach any importance to it. I considered the revision of the terms of the Budapest Memorandum, which was the one where basically the U.S. and U.S. and Russia agreed to protect the neutrality and independence of Ukraine in exchange for giving up their nukes. That was in '94, I think. Which was discussed in Kiev 2 years ago to be just a formality that gave Britain a reason to settle in Ukraine. Britain, along with the U.S. and Russia, was the guarantor of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and it seems to have been the only document where she was. Well, the territorial integrity was violated, respectively. Britain could enter. Then we assumed it would create a Poland-Ukraine-Turkey cordon between the Russian Federation and the EU, with a personal economic interest. Remember, we wrote about it at the time? Okay. But no one really thought about nuclear weapons. Of course, their appearance immediately changed the situation. Ukraine could easily replay all territorial conflicts with the Russian Federation and dictate terms to Moscow. Any Russian projects would rest on Ukraine and its allies. Complete victory. Ukraine takes Donbass. Then Crimea dictates the conditions through the pipe on compensation for the fighting. This is a very smart and sharp move. Britain did something similar in its former colony, India, when it divided into two countries, Hindu and Muslim, and helped both acquire nuclear weapons. Then both countries locked in a clinch, a long term unsolvable confrontation. Moreover, if India was helped in the development, then Pakistan has simply handed over the documents for production, although according to the official version, they were stolen. And look, and to be fair, this was something that happened a lot with UK's decolonization, right? Like what they did with Kuwait being lopped off from Iraq, which was Mesopotamia, or if you want, Jordan and Palestine. You can pick any number of places around the world. And this is something in making Ukraine basically a check on Russia. That's something that could be out there. Hey, good morning, Dave. Good morning, JW, Little Dipper, Chris, Free Green, Joseph. Good morning to all you all. Good to see the normal morning crew. God bless. Glad you're here with us. Thank you for tuning in this morning. Appreciate you. All right, so where were we? Ukraine also has its own scientific resources. And before we go to this, remember, Ukraine produces a hell of a lot of uranium. This is something what they do there. Specialized institutes in Kharkiv and Kiev, Soviet facilities for the production of delivery vehicles in the Dnieper remained. Rosatom specialists gradually lost access to nuclear power plants in Ukraine, which are used in the production process. Ukraine announced a complete transition to American dedicated fuel. Not so long ago, I spoke with the former Minister of Energy of Ukraine and asked if it was so dangerous. He answered briefly, "It's fucked up." That's what he said. His quote. "I'm a technically illiterate person. I can't tell you exactly what that meant." Good morning, Tim. But even then, I should have wondered why he and his colleagues were suddenly and massively consulted in Moscow. Then they began to connect all human resources. Then there was an unexpectedly decisive sweep of the rear in Kazakhstan, Asia, in the Russian Federation itself. Hasty preparation for the operation. Obviously, even many members of the Security Council were not in the subject. From the table, they took out worn-out theses about nationalists, NATO, the death of civilians, and a terrible blow, the consequences of which, destruction and death, turned me inside out. Yeah, maybe a somatic trauma reaction as your word is your maybe you're right. Maybe I am being traumatized. You might be right about that. Who knows? It's a good point. Rev Kev said, "I think you can assume you are experiencing a somatic trauma reaction as your word tongue is your primary tool. All of us in battle experience these things. It's possible. Maybe."
You're just talking too fast.
No, I talk slow. It's even worse.
Is it?
Yeah. What was in the report is not clear. I don't know whether the Ukrainians themselves started producing something or the British brought the components. Why was the elite information not voiced by Putin himself? Apparently, so as to not look like Colin Powell with a test tube at the UN. Apparently, more serious evidence was needed if they were found, but only this version explains all the oddities of the Russian-Ukrainian war since yesterday, and I can talk about it. Let me see if there's anything else here. 1 second here. Just give me 1 second. I want to read. There's a lot of things I have to kind of pull through here. One of the things, I want to read one other piece from the same thing. It's starting to make sense. This is the same channel. At least the case against weapons of mass destruction is a better one than the U.S. had in Iraq in 2003. Why the AFU and national security forces will fight for Kharkiv to the last. It was there that Zelensky planned to make a nuclear bomb. And the AFU is the armed forces of Ukraine, just so you understand. Kharkiv is the city in the far northeast that's been a mess. In addition to the fact that Kharkiv is considered the Russian capital of Ukraine, the National Scientific Center, Kharkov Institute of Physics and Technology, is also located here. It was this center, according to the information voiced with reference to the SVR, that's their security service, or that's the Russian security service, rather, that was assigned one of the main roles in the creation of Ukrainian nuclear weapons. Just so you know, FSB is their FBI, SVR is their CIA. Save you a little time. The experimental base, the NSC Kharkov Institute, allows conducting a wide range of research on the study of nuclear materials, including spent reactor fuel assemblies. They can be used to produce weapons-grade plutonium. Most likely, it will not be possible to cover up all traces of this activity, and maybe the Ukrainian authorities have something to lose in Kharkov. So we hear that, and we also hear the story, as I knock my phone over, about these biological bases. Thank you, by the way, Lone Wolf. I'm glad you appreciated the sermon. We also hear the story about all these biological bases that are being shut down throughout Ukraine. That apparently the order went out as soon as the Russians began invading. The United States was conducting research on the weaponization of things like anthrax, of different forms of biological agent. I don't remember all of them. There were so many, and people say, "Oh, well, we wouldn't do things like that." Let me tell you something. My wife has Lyme disease. Not only do we do things like that, that was the whole point of Operation Paperclip. You know, there's a joke they make that the Germans lost the war, but the Axis won. They make that joke because we grabbed all the worst research that they were doing, the Japanese and the Germans, and we kept running with it. So please be aware and don't be naive that you think your government wouldn't do things like that. I mean, after COVID, if you still think that America wouldn't invest in the sort of biological, chemical warfare against their own people that we've seen all over the place, I think you're being a little bit naive. So what we see is that Russia, for whatever reason, wasn't happy about what they found. There was another example that's going around there. They claim to have found a NATO laptop in the area of Mariupol that had a bunch of information that NATO was planning through Ukraine, of arranging for Ukraine to have an invasion of Crimea on March 8th. Which would be tomorrow, and I presumably, based on the information, this would have been before the Russian invasion incursion happened, and that they were going to go into the Donbass. And you could say, hey, it's Ukrainian territory; they could take that back. But if Ukraine had gone to war with Russia over that, and NATO was busy arming them, what kind of a damage would that cause? And if Russia got wind of all this, well, then you begin to understand why Russia went in there. Russia was jumping the gun because they saw that an invasion was happening the other way, and that would perhaps explain these sort of inconsistencies about how Russia acted. Now, they had troops on the border, but how well this plan was set up. Of course, they're going to say, hey, we planned it from the beginning, but we have to continue the fact that maybe the bear felt like, it was in danger, and that's why Russia's acting out. And when you watch all these actors that have been coordinated in the effort against Russia and all the propaganda, how quickly it's been organized, and these massive sanctions, which, by the way, don't just include the usual powers. When you have the Swiss banks going out there and saying, we're going to mess with your money, that usually suggests something bigger is afoot. So all of this to say that Russia's fear of that there was a planned nuclearization may not be totally misplaced. And so what are we looking for now? Is there the potential that because Russia sees all these attacks, because NATO be involved, they may choose to have nuclear warfare against the West, especially against maybe Poland and Romania to begin? Poland especially, who's allowing forces and units and real-time intelligence to go through. I mean, pretend you're in Russia for a second, right? If you know that the Russian pilots are getting killed because of NATO-supplied weapons, NATO-supplied pilots, NATO-supplied mercenaries, and they're just hiding behind the border, you know what that would look like to you? It would look like cowardice, and it would look like these are people who should be brought into the war, and that's maybe what NATO wants. They want Russia to declare war so that they can sell to their own populations. That Putin's this evil, horrible person. And, Putin has been there a very long time, and what a lot of people don't realize, and Russia watchers say, is that Putin is the sort of not hardline person. You say, like that idiot who went out there and said, Lindsey Graham, who went out and said, we should assassinate Putin. Do you know if you assassinate Putin, you'll have someone like Shoigu running the thing? You think things are bad now? The hardliners would love for Putin to be out of the way. He's actually the moderate voice in Russia, and I get that you don't think that way because America's used to thinking of everything as a vassal state. But that's not the way the world works over there. And whatever you end up doing, you're leading to a position where war looks larger and larger, and Russia's starting to shut off the gas. The economies are decoupling, and when that happens, what's the disadvantage of war? Because Russia's going to take Ukraine, and if we keep arming them, Russia at some point is going to take shots against the West. And you can see the tit-for-tat escalatory measures, and if you decide you're going to try to beat Russia, it's like that one broadcaster said, what purpose does Russia have for a world that it's not going to be a part of? It'll blow it up. So, the mature thing would be, if you can't get people to sit at the table, you know what? Give the Wookiee what he wants. I mean, and I know people don't want to hear that, but you know what? Ukraine's been a part of Russia for a very long time. I'm sure there could be a carve-out of the Northwest, maybe even of Kiev, and you can work it out. And by the way, screw this Kiev thing, okay? This is revisionist history. That country's been Kiev. If there were Ukrainian people with a long history, it's Kiev. Kiev. Okay? You understand that. The Ukrainians weren't calling Kiev in ancient times. You know who came up with that? George Soros. God, it's annoying. I'm against anyone who pronounces it that way. I'm honest to God, that's my new line in the sand. Um, So that's what we're hearing now, and what we are hearing as well is that nuclear materials are being taken from some of these different plants, and maybe that's why there's a lot of fighting happening around them. And will there be a bigger event? From the Russian side, the suggestion is that there might be because the Russians are losing in urban warfare, that there'll be a nuclear or radioactive bomb attack on Kiev, and when that happens, we might see that blamed on Russia because everyone in the West is already there to support it. The whole media propaganda complex, and they've shut down the ability of competing narratives to come forward. So that's where that story is. And if the Russians are going to get blamed for that, the Russians are going to say, you know what? If you're going to blame us for things we don't do, fine. We will be the big bad bear. We'll take a bite out of you. And that's when nuclear war starts. And maybe that's what they want. I mean, there's an evil force at the back of this, too. I thank you. I'm glad I'm getting so many people agreeing with me that yeah, we are fighting now. We are the Kiev linguistic religion. What do you call it the way you pronounce of it? The Kiev Enunciation Brigade. That's what we're going to have to be here. Kiev. What actually say like the Kiev International Enunciation Volunteers. KIEV. Kiev. See, we put it together.
What's it stand for?
Kiev International Enunciation Volunteers. That we're going to pronounce it right, damn it, and this is the end of it. It's almost as bad. I mean, are there? This is another thing. Like, are there any total aside? But we need a little laugh. What is a word that people pronounce funny in your region that just drives you nuts? Like out west, they say rough instead of roof, and I don't know what that is. Every time I hear something like that, I want to smack them. Or like the way I mispronounce the word.
Rough.
Yeah, they say it wrong. They just say it wrong. Or like the way I say,
Draught.
I've learned to say sorry instead of sorry because that's how I learned to say it because my mother was a New Yorker. But I've learned, and Dana makes fun of me because I say it real slow because I'm trying to say it right.
I like when you say it the wrong way. It doesn't sound right when you
Because you're used to it. Yeah, no, drought instead of drought. It's terrible. That should be out. Or like they said in water. Yeah, no, they of course they pronounce it that way. So Free Green was in Kiev twice, and they pronounced it Kiev, and they would. Why wouldn't you? It's not like we heard this our whole life, but this is that whole revisionist intelligence thing. In any case, so what is continuing? Russia's cutting off its internet, probably because they fear cyber warfare, cyber attacks being launched against them. People are being disconnected from one another. And we are seeing at the same time that that's happening, we are seeing energy prices go up like crazy. We see the U.S. consulting with every dictator, and China's been quiet. China's been real quiet. There was an interesting piece that I had read just a few hours ago. Let me see if I shared it. You guys want to hear an interesting piece about this? It's a little long though. Let me see if I'm willing. Did I share it or did I not share it? Where is it? It's 7 pages. I don't know if I want to read this whole article, but basically I put it in there. It's from Defense and Foreign Affairs, March 7th, 2022, and it's how Ukraine saved communist China. And what it commented was the suggestion that basically, and I'll try to summarize it for you rather than reading the whole thing, is that China wasn't going to be able to buy the goods it needs with the lockout, and Russia provides the goods China needs and military support. But China doesn't want to get into a war with the West, actually. It's saying because it doesn't know how it would come out of it. And so it basically said that these two need each other. But the suggestion is in this article is that Russia is actually the senior partner, which is not crazy to say because people think the people who lead are the people who have the most money. All you have is mouths to feed when you have the most money. It's who has the most weapons and who can employ them most successfully. Look at the jihad if you want an example. It's a terrible example, but it was a couple Arabs who could fight really well, or the Mongols who had a ton of tributaries who went through and they were able to enforce things, or the British for that matter, if you want. Their navy could just shell the ports and keep the things away. They had very small groups. I mean, think of when the British ruled India. You think they ruled most of India? No, they had different like satraps and different rajas, I think they called them over there, that they controlled through it. And in a lot of ways, Russia's using that sort of strategy. But Russia and China have a synergy right now, and we'll see how well that works together. But it was an interesting piece just because talking about how Ukraine saved communist China is that, let's see if they had just a simple one here. Let me see 1 second here. I want to see if I can find just the conclusion of this because it goes into a lot of detail about what is. In conclusion, the bottom line in this piece, just so I want to make sure I attribute it properly. Give me 1 second here. This is by Gregory R. Copley, editor of Defense and Foreign Affairs. Okay, so this is a pretty serious magazine. In conclusion, the bottom line is that while Beijing may feel, that was terrible, Beijing may feel a certain sadness that it has slipped into a subordinate position again with regard to Russia, the reality is that the Ukraine war has stabilized the position of the Communist Party of China and the People's Republic of China as Xi Jinping moves toward consolidating his domestic position in history at the 20th CPC Party Congress in October 2022. Xi's position in China domestic power struggles was, after all, made even more ambiguous because of the clear failure of the February 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics to restore prestige and credibility to an increasingly isolated China. To be sure, that poor investment in staging the Winter Olympics would not be enough to derail Xi's bid for re-election at the 20th Party Congress, but it hardly helped him. What ultimately emerges for the Communist Party is something which was imagined during the Cold War, a harmonious, if expedient, Sino-Russian bloc which could build a global position of allies and partners. What helped end the Cold War was the West's move to exacerbate the Sino-Soviet rift, and that process also included the projects by Reagan and Thatcher to Russia and Nixon to Beijing. But the West is not in a position to use those same tools so easily in the future. And so that's one of the things. So what's this doing? It's making America and the West take forces out of the Indo-Pacific. That's something that they want. And it's also China's problem is that China can't say Ukraine, like Russia could say Ukraine broke away from Russia. That's true. But the truth is the People's Republic of China broke away from the Republic of China, if you know the history of it. So that's what's different. And that's something that makes a big difference in the history of this, even though they want to go into Taiwan. And they could, but look, here's what happened. If they went into Taiwan, the Taiwanese would take out the Three Gorges Dam and you deal with an 8-figure death toll. And China could win that war, but would their country have anything to exist afterwards? And that's the problem. And that might be why Russia went into Ukraine, because if they didn't do it now, they couldn't do it later. And this is what the West does. It says, you're going to be peaceful and you're going to be friendly with us. And if you try to do something different, we have 8 billion missiles on your border. So you go ahead, you're going to take it and you're going to like it. You're going to take our rainbow flag and you're going to take our big Globo Homo missile, right up the pooper. And that's kind of what the West does. And it is terrible. And yet, Dana shared this horrible video, by the way, for Australia. And I feel so bad from our Australian friends. They have all these little rainbow flags and they're dancing around. Or like the head of MI6 who went around and said, don't forget the reason we're fighting food is for LGBTQ, blah, 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 blah. And you wonder...
having major flooding there. And the police are nowhere to be found because they're all waving rainbow flags celebrating Mardi Gras.
Well, at least you're not throwing people into quarantine camps. That's an improvement. But yeah, no, Australia's screwed. I mean, it's so bad. But anyway, there was another piece I read that I think I shared here, and this was from the Federalist. And it basically, what it said is NATO intervention. They did a war game in 2019. If NATO and Russia ended up fighting, or if you ended up having a war in Ukraine in 2019, this is by Harry Kazayanis. And it basically said NATO intervention in Ukraine could spark nuclear war. Here's how it could happen. It's a 7-minute read. I'll read it to you. Why not? We got a little time. You guys like when I read stories to you, right? Story time with Mr. Tom.
Can I read a 7-page article?
No, it's a 7-minute article.
Okay.
What? No, I'm not going to read. I had a 7-page one before. I didn't read that. Okay. So I'll read this. This is what the West thinks that's going to happen. Let's just call Washington, D.C. to just wash. I don't know. What we should, I would rather call it the, what was it say? The after zone, right? Or something after. Who knows? Washington's going to get themselves blown up. That's why no one's there, but they don't care. And honestly, it's a wicked city. It really is. I mean, the whole vibe is terrible.
What was that thing you were telling me about this morning?
What? Oh, that when I used to drive in we were coming in off 270, whatever the road is, you come out from Hagerstown there, and like the way they have their lights are shaped like T's, and they look like crosses. Like, honest to God, they look like the sort of crucifixes you would find around the old Appian Way. It was, I've never liked Washington.
About the truckers.
Oh, yeah, okay, so, right, so the Freedom Convoy in America, which is a total afterthought, they had a bunch of them sitting outside Maryland, and like, we don't want going to D.C., it's too creepy there. It was just a 1-minute thing of them sitting outside, but it was a curious thing. In any case, let's read the article here. Okay, so this is from the Federalist. NATO intervention in Ukraine could spark nuclear war. Here's how it could happen. And this is nothing you don't already know, but this is what literally their own wargaming of the elites, because the Federalists would be in that background. These are the people who pick those Supreme Court justices that betray you, like Kavanaugh. They're the ones who they go to. In the situation we mapped out, not only does NATO get sucked in unintentionally, but Russia releases nuclear weapons in its desperation. How did we just kill 1 billion people? Over just 3 days, as I have done countless times over the last several years, a group of past and present senior U.S. government officials from both sides of the aisle gathered to wage a NATO Russia war in a simulation at the end of 2019. In the course of what we called the NATO Russia War of 2019, we estimated 1 billion people died. And if we aren't careful, what happened in the simulation could happen as this war erupts over Ukraine. In fact, the simulation I mentioned above from 2019, in which Russia invades Ukraine in a similar way as it did over the last week or so, not only does NATO get sucked in unintentionally, but Russia also eventually releases nuclear weapons in desperation. The result is an eventual escalation of bigger and more dangerous nuclear weapons, whereby over 1 billion lives are lost. So you're talking about roughly an eighth of the world's population there. But before we start staring into the abyss, allow me to explain the goal of such simulations. NATO would clearly have a massive conventional advantage in any war with Moscow, ensuring that in a straight up fight, Putin would lose. However, Russia has stated time and time again it will use nuclear weapons to defend its territory and its regime if it feels mortally threatened. Our simulation always seems to ask, can we ever defeat Russian President Vladimir Putin in an armed conflict over Ukraine or the Baltics and not start a nuclear war in the process? So far, over at least several years, and with at least 100 different participants that all held different ideas about war and political allegiances, the answer is flat out no. And yet they picked the war anyway, so what's that tell you, right? All right, so setting the scene for war. The scenario the group decided to test back in late 2019 was similar to today. Russia decided to invade Ukraine under the excuse that it must defend Russian-speaking peoples that are being oppressed by Ukraine's fascist government. True, actually. In our scenario, we assumed Russia performs far more admirably than it does today, but has more limited objectives, and that Moscow wants to connect Crimea to separatist regions in eastern Ukraine that are under its effective control. We assumed Russia does that quickly, achieving most of its military objectives in roughly 4 days. But Ukraine does not give up so easily, just in real life today. Ukrainian forces, after taking heavy losses, mount an impressive counterattack, whereby Russia loses over 100 tanks and over 2,500 soldiers. Images on social media show Russian armor ablaze. Elite Su-35 fighter jets are shut down from the skies, and arms are now flowing in from the west in massive numbers. Putin is outraged. He thought Ukraine would simply roll over, but he does not factor into his calculus the nearly decades-long training Kiev received from the U.S. and NATO, nor Ukraine's military buildup for the last several years that was focused on this scenario. Russia then decides that its limited military objectives were a mistake and that all of Ukraine must be demilitarized. Moscow then launches a massive ballistic and cruise missile strike, followed up by Russia's Air Force launching its own shock and awe campaign, destroying a vast majority of Ukraine's command and control structure, Air Force, air defense, and armored units in the process. At the same time, Russia starts surging troops to the borders of Ukraine in what looks like an imminent general invasion and occupation of the entire country. The spark. Here's where things take a turn for the worse. You know what I like too? These think tank people. Oh, Ukraine just got blown up in a war because we want to resist. Oh, that's okay. Who cares about that? But once it affects us, it matters. It's this sort of thinking from our elites, this sort of learned sociopathy. You know, I'm wearing the shirt for it today. You know, high functioning sociopaths. These are low functioning sociopaths that get people into real trouble. All right, a Russian ballistic missile's guidance system fails and it crash lands into NATO member Poland, killing 34 civilians as it tragically lands into a populated village along the Polish-Ukrainian border. While the missile was not aimed at Poland intentionally, pictures on social media show children crying for their mothers and bodies left unrecognizable, and demands for justice and revenge mount. To its credit, Poland, which has its own tortured history with the Soviet Union and Russia, does its best to show restraint. While not responding with its own military, it leads an effort to see that Moscow pays a steep price for its aggression in Ukraine and actions, even unintentional, in Poland. Warsaw leads a diplomatic and economic boycott of Moscow, resulting in Russia being kicked out of SWIFT. By the way, that's happening, and that gets finalized, I think, on the 12th, if I'm not mistaken, as well as direct sanctions on Russian banks, similar to what we are seeing today. In our scenario, Russia's reaction is also swift. Moscow decides to launch a massive cyber attack on Poland, having based cyber warriors, good morning, Patrick, all throughout NATO territory, using their geography and proxy servers to mask the origin of the attack. Russia, in just 2 hours, takes offline Poland's entire electrical grid, banking sector, energy plants, and more, essentially taking Poland back to the Stone Age. Now, I will say they have a submarine. I forget what the name of the ship is for it, but they have one that recently took the port. It's the one thought that would cut the undersea internet cables. That might be the next move of the Russians as well. We'll see. People have different things, but I want you to see what these people expect, and that they still go forward with this. This is their own planning back in 2019. And everyone does contingency planning, but people are usually not stupid enough to push forward into this, and yet they do. And you have to look at the role. I just have to come back to this because it's sitting in my mind that Zelensky might represent a third faction. He could be the lever that leads all sides to fight one another. Who is Zelensky? We really need to know this much better. Anyway, and this is where the nightmare begins. Even though attribution is hard to achieve, Poland appeals to NATO and starts to privately share its desire to invoke Article 5 of the NATO Charter, declaring an attack on one is an attack on the entire alliance. NATO is worried, and there is debate on how far to punish Russia, while also feeling if they do not have a clear military objective amongst the member states, as some want to respond to what happened in Poland, while others feel they must intervene militarily in Ukraine. Okay, the response. Here's where NATO surprises everybody. The alliance decides to set up a limited no-fly zone around the Ukrainian city of Lviv to protect innocent civilians and refugees that are trapped and have nowhere to go. Russia is warned. NATO is not intervening in the conflict, but will ensure its planes in the airspace around Lviv are protected. NATO does make clear its jets will be in the skies above Ukraine, but will not operate from Ukrainian territory. In Moscow, Putin now gets a sense that NATO is destined to intervene on Ukraine's side. Russia fears NATO will use this protected corridor as a base of operations to send ever more sophisticated weapons. Which, by the way, isn't that what we're doing right now? And with its economy now in a tailspin due to sanctions, Putin feels the walls closing in on him. Before NATO can impose its no-fly zone, Putin orders strikes on any remaining airfields and assets around Lviv. But here's where Putin miscalculates and sets the stage for a NATO-Russia war. Putin orders another massive cyber attack on the Baltic states' military infrastructure, thinking NATO will use the Baltics to stage an invasion of Russia. This ends up being the last straw for NATO, which then decides a direct intervention in Ukraine is necessary to push back against Russian aggression. Before even an announcement is made, Russian intelligence sees muscle and troop movements indicating an impending NATO attack and decide to strike first, with tactical nuclear weapons. NATO decides to respond in kind. Russia then targets European cities with nuclear weapons, with NATO and America also responding in kind. What is left is nothing short of an apocalypse, with what we estimate to be 1 billion people dead. No war goes as planned. And this, by the way, this could happen fast because this is what it is. Nobody wants to be caught out and nobody trusts each other. And saying that, once you paint someone as Hitler, they're going to behave as Hitler. I mean, and it's just the way it is. And look, I've lived the life of cancel culture. I actually have a unique understanding of this, having been painted with that particular broad brush. At some point, you're like, okay, well, fine. You've made it impossible, and you've done that. And one would hope that actually the Chinese are the moderating voice here. Is Russia, Russia understanding of things. If I will say this, if Russia doesn't swallow the provocations that NATO is putting on it, and they start causing problems in other countries, which they very well can, and theoretically would have every legal justified right to do so, this is, I can't see it going backwards, but I will say NATO at that point will go fully in. It seems like they want to anyway. But anyway, no war goes as planned. Let's finish the article. In every scenario I've been a part of, there's one common theme to all of them. When Putin feels boxed in and feels Russia is directly threatened, usually from a mistake he makes on the battlefield, he decides to use whatever escalatory step he desires to try and make up for it. While we may soon see Ukraine and Russia find a diplomatic path out of this brutal war, both sides seem dug in. This means the chances for escalation like the above are high, and if Russia and NATO do become involved in direct conflict, Putin knows that in a conventional fight his regime would be defeated. That means Russia will choose nuclear war. The only question in a NATO-Russian war seems obvious. How many millions or billions of people would die? And so the answer is, as Joshua once said in War Games, the famous movie with Matthew Broderick, the only way to win is not to play. And does that mean giving Russia what it wants? Yeah, in this case it does. Ukraine had a chance to join NATO in the 1990s. People don't realize that. And Ukraine took all the NGO money. They took the Soros money. They accepted the coup. They, shelled their own people. These are not, mindless victims in terms of their government. As the people, yeah, absolutely. But we're mindless victims in America. I mean, how many of you are happy with the Biden regime? How many of you are feeling good about Bojo or God knows Trudeau? Now you can protest again. Now that it doesn't mean anything or it supports the government line. So, I mean, this is what
really
yeah, absolutely.
It's like it didn't even happen.
No, they pretend it doesn't, and then the WAPN Weapon.
Respect whammon.
Whammon. Yeah, no.
Respecting whammon.
Little pootie pie there, right? The weapon of mass distraction that we're dealing with is this conflict that's just being spiraled out of control, and they want it. They want the Great Reset. They want the New World Order. They want the currency collapse, and they're willing to use even the dissidents like they do as foils, and like even in America, they're just gleefully the security state's waiting. I mean, you can even see I've been poked and prodded by some of them, honestly. You know the old meme where they take the stick, the glowy says do something? They want the dissidents to do something because they need us to do something. We're just sitting back like, look, you're blowing it up fine on your own. We don't need to be accelerationists when we have a regime like this. Go ahead and try to keep people in control once gas runs to $6, $7, $8 a gallon. I mean, your own economy will be broken. The thing will break up of its own accord. But this is the world they want. They want to break the world.
You think we'll have a big yellow vests thing here?
No, you know what I think will happen? I think what will happen, actually, is people will just stop listening to Washington. At some point, some governor, maybe DeSantis, maybe...
People still have to put gas in their cars.
Yeah, they have to put gas in their cars, but you don't think to say we're not going to pay federal taxes. Texas could say, hey, we got gas. We're going to take care of ourselves. We're just not going to ship it outside the borders of Texas. And Oklahoma will join Texas. This could lead to balkanization real fast if they don't get us into a war. But they seem pretty committed to getting us into this war. And when they do, maybe the cities will be gone. We've talked about what a nuclear war looks like. We've talked about how the lines are forming. And they are putting Russia in a box because they want Russia to have this war. We're talking about this even before Trump got in there, that this is what Clinton wanted. This is what we saw, all this investment in Ukraine. And there's just funny stuff. There's something that isn't, there's a piece that's missing in this. Maybe it's the history of the people that used to be in Ukraine before the Rus got there. I don't know. For those of you who understand the history of the Khazars, maybe there's something there worth looking into. I know some people do, and some people argue that that's actually a big part of the play, especially when you see Naftali Bennett going between. But I don't pretend to know the answer. I do know this. I know that your money's going to buy less tomorrow than it does today. The fuel is going to cost more for the foreseeable future until you can't get it, and that you need to be buying the things you need now for long-term survival. So let's talk about that for a second as a pragmatic thing. What I recommend specifically is go through your prep, see what you need, and buy the tools you need. I do think areas will produce their basic goods needed for survival, like certain foods, even though your diet will be less varied. If you want things that are fancier, like, honestly, this is going to sound crazy, but a suggestion for someone who's prepped, buy spices, and I'm going to tell you why. You're probably going to have, like, say you live where I live. I'm going to have a ton of apples. I would be happy to have some cinnamon and brown sugar. You know what I'm saying? So if you have certain things that you can, that are, how should I say, taste amplifiers, let's say, or taste multipliers, it might not be a bad idea if you have a little extra money on the side to keep those there. Part of the game that you're going to have to take care of is keeping yourself mentally in the game, keeping yourself sharp, and you're going to have to be able to give yourself certain sweets. Buying good tools for things that you have to do, like farming, and if you are someone who has invested heavily in power tools, I would suggest very strongly, unless you have literally the ability to have a gas pump in your backyard, you invest in hand tools. A lot of preppers made the decision the last couple of years to switch from machine labor to animal labor, specifically because it was sustainable, not because it was efficient. And I would think that's not a bad situation. Although the problem you have with that is in famine times, animal feed will be hard to come by, and people will look at animals as meat to be taken, especially when they're starving, even if you've been prepared. So unless you're separated, that's going to be a problem. I mean, our chickens are probably okay because, or rabbits, smaller things, because the breeding things. Chickens. But let's say you had an oxen, okay, which would be an awesome thing to have, or even a donkey. If people are starving, horse meat is something that's eaten all around the world, and I know that's something that's kind of horrible, but that's the reality of it. So you need to begin planning for the fact that people around you don't plan, having tools and things you can use on your head, ranging from, and I know people talk about the obvious things like boomsticks, but going from that, you need to have good tools, have a good pry bar. Think of what you would want in a basic tool set for things if you had to do minor construction on your own. If you don't have a propane torch, I recommend go getting some, maybe buy some extra propane for it. And stock up all of your supplies of whatever liquid fuels you want to have. It's not going to get cheaper. I was reading, in fact, that I was trying to see what country it was. One of the countries I was reading, I forget where it was literally out of gas cans at this point because people were figuring they were going to plan beforehand. And that's another problem. If you've been planning on surviving off a generator, okay, how are you going to deal with that? These are sort of things you want to do. Corey writes that instant coffee, flour, lard, powdered milk, honey stores forever. Honey is absolutely awesome for so many things. Definitely something worth taking taking a look at. And I've had a lot of people reach out to me in the last couple days and say, hey, let's keep in touch if things get funny. If things go down on the internet, we'll be there on Telegram. If that doesn't work, y'all can find me through email, newalbion@protonmail.com. And I'll try to find a way to put things out there. Yeah, the ham radio, KC1QHL, that's me. I thank Ben and thank the other people who are helping me get set up with that. We'll try to get onto that. But make connections in your area, and just if you're in a city or near a base, have your head on a swivel. If NATO and Russia go to war with one another, even if it starts off slow, for the reasons they described, this will probably become nuclear. Those will be your first strike targets. You can find those maps, the 100 biggest targets. If you're near one of them, don't be. And if you choose otherwise because you don't have another choice, hey, you've been warned. What can I say? We can't control these outcomes. Weird things are coming down the line. And in the Great Reset, they are willing, who are in charge, to sacrifice as many people as needed to get a new beginning to this world. And whether you believe Russia is legitimate or is not legitimate, Salt's another good example. A book on curing would not be misplaced. And fishing equipment, if you don't have it, by the way, that's good to have too. And even if you just, in fact, it's something I want to buy. I'm going to go buy a big net. That's what I want to go buy next time I go out, because it's not how you're supposed to fish, but honestly, it's a really efficient one.
You're just gonna go at the fish with a big old net.
Yeah, I'm gonna find a stream. I'll tell you what I'm gonna do. I'm honest to God. I'm just what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go find a feeder stream. I'm gonna put a big net in there, like they do in Alaska, like the natives do, and I'm gonna grab them before they even get into the damn lake. I'm not gonna play fair, because this is about survival. Survival is not about playing fair. It's about figuring out the way to do things intelligently. And Atlantic salmon is quite good. The runs come up here, and you know what? They're all going to get eaten if they go downstream. So it's either going to be me and the people up here, who are up here in the northern area, or it's going to be people who are down there. This is how you have to
You're
think.
gonna have to get yourself some extra pairs of shorts and pants.
You're gonna need some waiter. Yeah, if you
rip your pants every time you try to jump across the street.
Look, the fact that I'm not good at when it needs to be done doesn't mean I don't talk about it. Thank my wife. You're my biggest fan here. But no, getting waiters is important, and learning the trap. By the way, definitely, Corey. That's another great suggestion. You may choose wisely. Although the only thing I think about as relates to this is I think game will quickly be depleted. I think that's one of the reasons why fish is maybe better. But that's why if you are a prepper and you are a homesteader and you want a really, really fast way for under $100, here's what you're doing. You're putting in some rabbit hutches. Those things breed like crazy. Breeding like rabbits is a thing. And get a couple chickens. If you have probably 6 birds, that's probably manageable. Just understand they poop like crazy and plan for it. There are different things you can do, and you'll have to decide how much you're willing to convert your house into a third world shithole. We've gone quite farther than you probably will, but nonetheless, we've done that for survival because we understand and we're going to help our community. Like even right now, I'm averaging a production of 8 to 9 eggs per day, so you figure that's about 9,000 calories, high proteins, high fats.
Yeah, we need to give away some eggs.
One of the problems, she's right. One of the problems you're going to find dietary about your ability to survive is that you're going to have a problem with proteins and fats. Everyone's going to have carbs. If you have those buckets, you're going to have carbs to your blue in the face, but that doesn't keep you sharp. It doesn't keep you in the game. People are going to go after that who haven't planned. And honestly, after it gets to that point, people are going to have to go after each other, except in communities, which is why when you see this breakdown, and you guys have asked me, what am I going to write next? And it's hard when I'm following this. I spend my time that I could be writing, talking to you each morning, but I tell you what popped in my head because I tried to visualize it, is you're going to have families, you're going to have individuals who are going out there as lone raiders. You're going to have families. We've pickled a lot of eggs, believe me. Dana eats beets like you wouldn't believe.
I love pickled eggs.
And she loves pickled eggs. We do pickle eggs. We have some. A good suggestion, though. Very good suggestion. I do hate them.
I want to learn how to water glass, too.
All right, well, you can do that. So what you're going to see is communities, clans, and tribes form if people can take care of each other, and once they do, you'll be blocked out. If you have a small agrarian town that's self-sufficient, like if you were in Maine, I'll tell you what they do. We used to talk about this in Greenville. What they're going to do is they're going to take their chainsaws with the last bit of fuel and throw about 40 logs across the highway. And the reason they're going to do that is to keep people out. People who are not there are a liability, and communities will probably try to take care of their own. And what that means for the ability to survive, well, it means that you better have a locally sustainable fuel source. If you live in the northern climates like we do, that's wood primarily, but it might be something different where you are. If you live in the Midwest, maybe it's corn. Ethanol is very viable, in terms of even producing liquor. I suspect it won't be long before some good old boys figure out how to modify an old truck to run on ethanol, if they don't already. I mean, it's the fuel content's a little different, but you could do that. And if you were a step ahead of the game, you might be thinking about these things. Like Free Green probably could tell you some other projects like that. That's his whole wheelhouse. I kind of understand it more abstractly. But these are the sort of things you might want to be thinking about in terms of your own personal planning for how you want to survive these challenges that are ahead, because the time is short. And, if you get cut off from comms, don't keep investing in a world that's dying. I mean, at this point, before the Russian events and the inflation ran insane, you could have made an argument the world's going to sustain a long time. I am now absolutely certain the dollar is going to break. The inflation is going to break it, and that we are going to see a new world order with a reset. And whether that's individual countries or a global thing, who knows? But what I do know is that your money's going to be worthless soon. So while it still has meaning, put it into something, whether it's store of value. I agree with the people who say silver is a better investment than gold, whether it's fuel, whether it's fixed goods. But what I would say is think about what you need to survive when systems don't work. And if you really don't know what to do, there's a real simple test you can do, and you won't like it, but you do it. Go and in fact, do it right now. I'll give you a challenge because I've had to live this challenge. Go and shut the breaker switch off to your electricity and shut your pipes off and leave them off for 72 hours. After 72 hours, you will know what you have to do differently. That might be about the amount of time you have to figure this out. That's the best advice I can give you. So, unless Dana has something she wants to share, you have anything you want to add, dear? Are there any observations you want to share from when we moved in here, when we didn't have fuel, we didn't have power, we didn't have electricity? Surprises that for people to know, and especially for women, because we do have women. We have a lot of women who listen to this channel who like listening to me because they know my wife keeps me in line. So. What I would say is,
That's
if
not
you
true,
have
we all
anything
listen.
for women, and maybe as well for people who have children, things you wouldn't think of, cloth diapers, if you count on having disposable goods, where are you going to dispose them? How are you
Right,
going to
even
dispose
if
them?
you
If you
don't
have
have
a big
any.
barrel, you can burn trash. And I know people say, oh, that's not environmentally safe. You know what? You got a problem. Trash is a big problem. Plastics are a big problem. Anyway,
Trash
Dana.
is a problem. Sanitation's problematic.
Yeah, you better have different ideas about how you're going to dispose of your own crap. And there's a lot of ones. And if you're living like we are in Maine, where it's 10 degrees, going outside to the outhouse isn't much of a strategy. We know people who do it
I mean,
and who do it well,
having a
but
compost toilet would be really, really cool.
so pretend for the people. We'll give Dana a little quiz here. If
Oh.
you thought there was a week left, and someone has $100 and lives in a suburban location, what would you tell them to be doing? What can they buy? What can they do?
With $100, not much.
Well, what can they do at home? What changes? What things should they be doing to plan and prepare? I'll make one. Store water. If you have to store water, even if you have to take tap water and put it in old Coke bottles, or 2-liter bottles, or
But even that, you got to put like a little tablespoon of bleach in there to keep it from going rancid. So it's not
ideally,
just storing bottles and.
right. So ideally, if you can, if you're a Costco member, or even if you're not, you go to Walmart, buy and store some water, because if there is radioactive fallout, anything like that, having water on hand, even with filters.
Get
You're
some
really
pool
asking
shock.
filters to have pool shock is smart. Okay, so pool shock is basically concentrated bleach. You can buy a tablet. Usually, I know last year they were selling like a 3-pack at Walmart for $13.
There's a video that I wanted to watch. What was it? Southern Prepper one about how to get radiation out of water, drinking water. I haven't gotten around to it yet, so sorry.
Another thing I might recommend to you is take a worm bin composter for waste. Absolutely great idea. I've seen some of those work. What's another thing I wanted to suggest to you? Print out whatever documents you want, and if you
Oh yes,
have
have hard copies of
hard
anything
copies
that's
of
important.
everything, and you're going to want to also, if you're a video person, and I know some of you are, if you have one of those EMF bags, that works really good. If not, maybe you take a hard drive and a laptop, or an old laptop, and it's going to sound retarded, but bear with me. Put them inside of a microwave. That is pretty much a cheap Faraday cage. It's not perfect, but pretty good. And those are options. So these are some things you can do. And look, do I hope it comes to this? No. Do I think we're going to have that sort of an EMP? I hope not. I think not, because I think we'll see a cyber attack, because I think they want to bring up the infrastructure on the other side of this. But I don't really know. And so Corey writes, make sure you know how to measure the pole shock down for small amounts. This is what you should have too: conversion tables and different receptacles for whatever you're going to need to move that you can do for hot liquids, for cold liquids, things in glass, things in plastic, whatever it is you need to do. And you can develop that. Hit up your Harbor Freight or something. And don't be afraid to hit up thrift stores and look for things. If you see something you think you could have use of, have redundant systems. So those are some of the things that I think would be really help. All right, so free green rights, wastewater throw composter rather, into water drip and spray lines and greenhouse beds of hydroponic rail system. So this is another. I'm glad you brought that up. Most people aren't going to be able to do all that much, but it's really not that hard. Even if you have to go buy, big crates and fill them up with soil, and if you have some grow lights, that's good too. If you have the ability to do that, or you have the thing set up. But if you're in an area where this is going to be a problem for you, consider buying some soil. I have done so already. That has already pre-feeding elements, and it's kind of a way to buy my way around certain problems. But we can't do it right now because it's just not warm enough. The plants would die. But understand, when you plant seeds, you got to start seeds weeks in advance of when this is. If you're in southern climates, you probably should be starting now. If you're in the north and you're starting to grow seed beds, you're probably going to start around April, depending how far north you are. For us, it's really late because we have a short season. But I also live in the potato and cold weather production capital of the world up here in Aroostook County. So we're going to be fine. We're going to be surviving off a Russian diet of potatoes, beets, stuff like that, broccoli, stuff like that grows well up here, and we have enough apples and other things. We'll be all right, because we are a rural community that's pretty much separated. Everyone forgets about us because we should have been part of Canada. Weird map things. But soil is a good thing to have, the ability to have passive systems, and the other thing is all of these systems take time. You are not used to having your day take that much time. That's why, literally, I joke with Dana, when I worked, I didn't work nearly so hard. I made money, but making the ability to survive on your own is very difficult. The biggest force multiplier I can say is find friends who have skills and talents, and if you can be in the area and work together and everyone has a skill, cross-train by all means, have a knowledge of the basic things, but survival is not a single person game. If you make it such, it will be very difficult. You guys use only bidets, no toilet paper, and healthier wastewater. How does that work? I mean, I know what a bidet is, but how well does that work? Because I've always thought, okay, all right, God, I can't believe we're going here. All right, here's where we're going. You guys should let me go, but you never do. I've always thought toilet paper is incredibly inefficient. I am not a big toilet paper fan. Dana used to call me the 3-square mare. That's literally what she called me, and you can judge your own judgment. And
you can figure that one out on your own.
And I might take some umbrage at it, but in all seriousness, Free Green makes an excellent point. Waste disposal, human waste disposal, especially because our waste is full of parasites. So if you ever want to go use some, what was they use, Fenben, or something. Not giving medical advice, but anyway. I think of Demolition Man. He doesn't know how to use the seashells. I wish I had the seashells, because I've always thought there'd be a better system. And a bidet, most of you know what a bidet is, but it's basically a water stream. And it strikes me you should have like a little water hose. You just spray the crap out of it like you're in a shower, and it'll come out nice and clean. In a way, you don't have little paper bits. And well, wipes. All right, wipes are better. But wipes, you have the disposability problem, and you also have the problem they're a finite thing. I felt like there should be a system for this. And if a bidet system works, I know in the West we never use bidets. Maybe the deep conspiracy is to keep you buying toilet paper. Once newspaper went away and we were in the digital economy, it was.
Here's your bidet.
This is what she hands me. You see what I have for a wife? What's in here?
It's water.
Oh.
You could spray it upside down. It would work. See, you could spray it like this.
All right, so. So I just got poop fumed with the water display. All right, so how much? Oh, go ahead. Let's product. Okay. Worried about toilet paper shortages? We have the solution for you. Spray it away.
It really does spray upside down.
I know it sprays upside down.
It's super cool.
Have you tested the prep?
Have I tested it?
Yeah.
You are soaking wet. Here, wipe your face off.
No, I'm saying, all right, so let's say, I can't believe we're in this conversation, but this is what happens. This is why you watch Sunrise in Pineland, as we go through this. Yeah, I know that. So would this be powerful enough, or do we need, like Jeremy Clarkson would do, put a V8 onto it, put a fire hose up your backside? I don't know if that'd be powerful enough. I guess for some things. I guess it depends.
Oh, no.
What?
Look what's growing in it.
Oh, you have mold in there.
Oh, God.
Mold grows. Oh, by the way, so this is another thing. If you deal with water.
I just sprayed it all over your face. I'm so sorry.
F. Here lies Tom.
I'm
He died of
sorry.
Lyme disease induced by what's the thing you get? What's the mold disease? What's the big one?
Just mycotoxins?
Mycotoxins. Yeah. So that's fine. I'm exposed to so much mold anyway. Oh man. Wait.
I'm sorry about that. I didn't realize how nasty
Please send
it
money
was.
to the Thomas J. Kaczynski Memorial Fund, care of Dana. Okay.
We'll have to put some vinegar
So all
in
right,
that.
yeah, we'll have. Oh, so let's talk about cleaning for a second, though.
Vinegar's good.
Cleaning. If one
Baking
thing you should
soda.
have, another thing. So preps you should have. A lot of white wine vinegar. You get the big
Not
bottles,
white
and not of
wine,
apple
just-
cider. No, the
just
white
white
vinegar.
vinegar.
Okay, white vinegar and the apple cider vinegar with the mother in it, because the mother makes a big difference. Dana can tell you why. Probiotics are in it. Okay, so that's why. So those are things you want to have a lot.
Use that for cleaning white vinegar.
And I would say if you're worried about food, one thing I would really recommend, and especially if you don't live in a hot environment, buy a ton of butter. I like olive oil too, but buy a ton of butter because it will keep. They say, oh, it won't keep. It'll keep. It keeps just fine. You know, the amount of things they tell you have to refrigerate isn't really accurate for everything. It's not perfect, but, you know, it's like learning what labels they put on there, say the expiration date. Sometimes it means you shouldn't use it, like dairy. Other times it means, hey, go buy more of this.
Yes.
And you have to learn the
Sometimes
difference between
expiration dates are optional. They're just suggestions.
Yeah.
We
And
learned in the veterinary world, we took expiration dates with a grain of salt because, yeah.
oh, does she want to come on the show today?
Hello.
Hand me the missus. We'll put her on before we go here. So, all right. Well, that doesn't help, but okay.
Just give me a second.
So, all right. We are now having a nose blowing break here. So I can't reach that far if I'm knocking the computer over.
Give me a second. She doesn't have her diaper on.
Oh, well, that's fine. If she poops on me, everyone will think it's funny. All right. What you see there, this is Barb. We're going to try to do... Barb, calm yourself. Barb. This is Barb. She's a Rhode Island Red. I will say this. If you want, and I know this up here in Maine, I can't speak for where you are. It might be different. But Chick Days have begun a Tractor Supply. You probably have a Tractor Supply near you, especially if you're in a rural area. What you can do is usually the chicks there run about $4 a piece. I don't know what's going to be this year. That's what it was last year. Although if you wait till they get bigger, so you have to feed them less, they'll actually usually sell them for like a quarter or whatnot. So different breeds you might want to get. This is a Rhode Island Red, just so you know what it is. They're very good egg producers. They're supposed to be durable and hardy birds. Our flock wasn't that durable and hardy. We took a lot of losses amongst our Reds.
Yeah, I would have to disagree with that.
But then again, we have to realize that our scenario of what we dealt with chickens isn't exactly normal. We've had a lot of luck personally. I think with the Orpingtons, we've done pretty well. We did lose 2 of our buffs, but that was one of them had Pippa had a, what would you call the problem she had? It was something with her rectum.
She had a prolapse. It went really, really wrong.
So she had that, and then did you sneeze, Bert? Of course you sneezed because you're busy smelling the poop flume water on me. So we had that. What else are good? You have to understand the difference between meat producing birds. Like the what would be an example of a good? The rocks are usually those.
Also, like research heritage breeds that will do well in your climate. You don't want to have a bird that's like fit for Iceland.
You know, I will say one thing: the birds we've gotten from independent suppliers, with the exception of our poles, and that was kind of a difficult situation for other reasons. In the move, have performed on average better than the birds, but birds are fragile animals. They're going to die pretty quickly. Although you can have them be your friends, and if you ever want to have a little friend and you're really lonely and you're by yourself, get a chicken diaper. I'm not even joking. Get a little rooster, and it will follow you around, and it will think it's one of your flock. But if you put 2 birds together, they cause chaos. That's why we have Barb by herself. Although she'll learn to walk better. We should bring up a Red later for her to walk with. If you want, if you have 2 diapers ready to go.
Yeah, the reason why she's so flappy is like her legs. She still doesn't have like the full use of her legs, so she flaps a lot to keep her balance. But she's getting better. But you know, I keep her in a diaper, and she's very clingy, very needy. This bird is like, oh yeah, I love her to death.
Barb wants to know why Lamprey isn't giving money to Egg Chat anymore. That's what she wants to know. I mean, there's nothing funnier than watching a bird have an egg, man. I've watched it now, and not to be a pervert, but they go. It's like imagine a woman having pregnancy every day, and you know about the life of a chicken. If you ever want to look at something interesting, look at the life cycle of a chicken. It's a jungle fowl bird that actually was used to eating bamboo, and it would go on certain flood seasons, and so it would panic when there were certain environments, and it would literally short its own lifespan to produce more food, which is why we have birds produce eggs every day, and they've kind of modified it a little bit, but that's basically what they do. See, we got the confirmation from Barb. So a little bit of tips, a little bit of fun. We'll keep an eye on things, but please be ready and be prepared. I mean, we've wanted here in Pinelanders for a very long time, like we talked about in the sermon yesterday. And if you haven't watched it, it's a good one. Go out there. Literally, it's an admonition from God, and I'm not even kidding, from God about how to survive as a nation in a time of things when they're bad. And really, it's to follow Him, to love Him, to honor Him, and then that good things come from that. And people say, "Well, that's crazy. I have to take care of myself." When you can't take care of yourself, that's how you learn to live on faith, and that's what we need to learn to live now. Because none of us can solve all these problems. Some of us have gotten further, but even let's take someone who has a full commune apart. How are you going to survive a tsunami that comes at your underground bunker? You're going to drown. Ultimately, we're all living on faith, and we're all going to die anyway. So we're fighting for a larger game. And remember that the people in charge know that, which is why they're willing to sacrifice us. We need to be willing to sacrifice ourselves for something higher, not because I'm telling you to kill yourself, but to realize that only when you realize there's more to life than worrying about death can you be free. And that's what I want. The freedom that comes, and the biggest freedom that comes, is in the embrace of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I recommend that to everyone heartily, because time is running short. Forgiveness is plenitude for those who accept the great gift of grace. It's not about you and what you can earn. It's about a commitment to recognizing something larger and something you can serve. So, Heavenly Father, I just pray for everyone that we find safety in your arms before we find safety in all these other areas, and that we can learn to help one another. Because when we all have faith in you, then we can stand together, and we can actually be stronger and survive and help one another as you hope for us and as the Lord Jesus instructed. So in His mighty name, I pray that for every one of you. God bless each of you. Thank you for supporting the program. Reminder, Venmo CVC PRV, PO Box 343, Eagle Lake 0437 or 04739. If there's big news, I'll come on and break it. And please share the broadcast. And I don't push this very hard, but you know what? I mean, it ends up being a numbers game at some point. Subscribe, let people know, and I'll keep doing this. I mean, I'm not doing other work that would be more productive, more paying, because A, it's not going to matter, but B, because I want to keep you informed, and we've built a community together, and we seek truth, and if we think you're wrong, we say it, and if you think I'm wrong, you're welcome to say it. That's what we debate. Come join us in the Telegram chat, get to know us, and just don't be obnoxious. We try to avoid that. If people come in there obnoxious, yeah, we ban them. Not because of what they believe, but because of how they act, which is different. Thank you for spending time with us. On behalf of Dana, Barb, Murray, wherever he's around. He knocked my coffee over this morning, not even joking. So if I'm a little cranky, that's why. And for everyone else who's here, God bless. Thank you. Pinelander out.